Welcome. So in this lesson, we're going to be talking about converting from fractions to percentages and decimals. So thus far in our journey, we've seen fractions and percentages and decimals, but now we're going to learn how to convert from one to another. So our learning objectives are to connect fractions, decimals, and percentages and carry out simple conversions. And in this lesson, we're going to be starting with fractions and learning how to go from a fraction to a decimal and how to go from a fraction to a percentage. So let's come over here and look at this table right here. It looks a bit of a mess at the moment, but it's going to make perfect sense really soon. So here is our fraction, and we want to turn this fraction into a percentage. So this orange line right here is taking us over to the percentage, and if we follow these orange instructions, it's going to tell us how to take a fraction and how to turn it into a percentage. So it says to convert a fraction to a percentage, multiply by 100. And in brackets here, I've written, this always works. It always works. You can always do this. If you have a fraction, so in this case, 2 over 5, you multiply it by 100. Now, when I multiply a fraction, I always like to multiply it by another fraction. So I'm going to write 100 as 100 over 1. Now, before I do my multiplication of fractions, I should always simplify first. 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. Having now done that, I will multiply. 2 times 20 is going to be 40. And 1 times 1 is going to be 1, which means I'm going to get 40% as my answer. So by multiplying by 100, I'm able to turn a fraction into a percentage. It's going to be 40%. Now, there is another method we could use to get to 40%, and that is create an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. So I have 2 over 5. And if I can make this into an equivalent fraction with its denominator being 100, I can figure out what the percentage is going to be. Well, I can do this for this one. I could go 5 times 20. And remember, if I times my denominator by something, I must times the numerator by that same amount. So that means I'm going to end up with 2 times 20 is 40, and 5 times 20 is 100. Now, 40 over a 100 is 40%, because percent means out of 100. So by turning it into an equivalent fraction over 100, I have, in essence, made it a fraction. Now, in brackets here, I've written, this only works if you can make the denominator 100. There are going to be some instances, for instance, if you had the denominator of 3, you can't times it by any whole number to make it to 100, so you can't do it. So this only sometimes works. But it's really going to be a neat little hack that you can use to speed up the process sometimes. But if this doesn't work, remember, you can always rely on this method right here. Perfect. Let's now move on to talking about how to go from a fraction to a decimal. So this is this green line right here, and this green instructions will tell us how to take a fraction and make it into a decimal. So it says to convert a fraction to a decimal, divide the numerator by the denominator. And this is always going to work. So that means I'm going to go 5 divided by 2.000. I'm just putting a whole bunch of zeros there just in case. Let's now perform this division. 5, how many times does 5 go into 2? It doesn't. So I carry that 2 over to here. I put my decimal place straight up. How many times does 5 go into 20? Well, that goes in 4 times, and that goes in perfectly, so I stop. So that means my answer is going to be 0.4. Perfect, and that's always going to work. You simply divide the numerator by the denominator, just like that, too easy. Now, there is another way we could do it, and that is make the denominator a power of 10 and use your knowledge of place value. So here I have 2 over 5. Well, what if I said, let's make that denominator 10, because it's a power of 10. So times this by 2, times this by 2. And if I do that, what I'm going to end up with is 2 times 2 is 4, and 5 times 2 is 10. So I've got 4 over 10, so 4/10. Well, I know through my knowledge of place value that that's going to be 0.4. So just like that, I'm able to get to the same answer. Now, I would argue that this is much, much easier than doing this division. So you should absolutely rely on this, but it only works if you can make the denominator a power of 10. So in other words, it's not always going to work. You can't rely on it 100% of the time because it's not always going to work. What if you can't make your denominator a power of 10? You can't use it. This method will always work, but it's important that you know this alternative method just in case you can use it to save yourself some time. So hopefully everything here made sense. Let's now go through another example to consolidate this learning. So let's now look at another example. So here, this time we're starting with 3 over 50, and we need to change it into a percentage, and then 3 over 50, we need to change it into a decimal. So let's begin by turning it into a percentage. The way we do this to convert a fraction to a percentage, you multiply by 100, and this always works. So I'm going to get 3 over 50. I'm going to multiply it by 100, and I'm first going to simplify it. So this is going to be, I can divide this by 50 to get 1 here, and I can divide this by 50 to get 2 here, which means I'm going to end up with 3 times 2, which is 6 over 1 times 1 is 1, so I'm going to get 6%, just like that. How easy was that? 6%. Now there is another way we could have gotten this percentage, and that is by creating an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100. So if I have 3 over 50, if I can make this an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100, I can quickly solve what my percentage will be, and to do that, I'm just going to times the top and bottom by 2. If I do that, I'm going to end up with 6 on 100, and 6 on 100 is 6%, because percent means out of 100. So by creating an equivalent fraction out of 100, I can quickly solve what my percentage will be. And as you can see, this is very advantageous to us because this is far simpler than doing this. But remember, this isn't always going to work. It only works if you can nicely make your denominator 100. So keep that in the back of your mind. It's not always going to work. Okay, having done that now, how can we turn a fraction into a decimal? So to do this, we would have to divide the numerator by the denominator. So this is going to be the long way to do it, but let's give it a go. So we have 50, and I am dividing 3. So I'm going to have to go 3, 0, 0, 0. Let's give this a go. So how many times does 50 go into 3? It doesn't, so I put a 0 here. I carry my decimal up, and I carry that 3 over here. How many times does 50 go into 30? Well, it doesn't, so I put a 0 here. And now I have to take this 30 over, so now I've got 30 coming over here, so this now is 300. How many times does 50 go into 300? Well, 50 goes into 300 6 times perfectly, which means I'm left with 0.06, and that is going to be my decimal, 0.06. Now, as you can see, this isn't the best way to do it, is it? This is a bit cumbersome. So we should always see down here, is there an easier way we can do it? There absolutely is. Can we make the denominator a power of 10? Well, we have 3 over 50. Oh, that didn't work, did it? Let's try that again. 3 over 50. To make my denominator a power of 10, I could simply times my denominator by 2 times this by 2, which means I'm going to be left with 6 on 100. 6 on 100. With my knowledge of place values, I know that's going to be 0.06 because my 6 there is in the hundredths place value. And just like that, I have answered the question. So this right here is to be preferred. But remember, you're not always going to be able to do it because you need to make your denominator a power of 100, and that's not always possible. But in this case, it is, and it's far easier than doing this. So hopefully that example has made sense to you. Now, before we go on to the next example, I kind of want to appreciate the fact that this method down here, when we made the denominator 100, is a little bit easier than doing this method here, isn't it? And so too, making the denominator a power of 10 is easier than doing this division. So whenever you're in the situation where you need to convert a fraction to a percentage or a decimal, you should always keep your eye out to see if these work. And if they do, you should do these instead of doing these ones right here because it's quicker. So with that being said, let's now go on to our next example in which we have 3 over 8. So instead of going through this method, let's see if we can just do this method down here. So I have 3 over 8, and what I'm trying to do is create an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100. Now, what would I have to times 8 by in order to make it 100? What would it have to be? And if you've done some thinking now, you've realized that, you know what? This isn't going to work. And that's what we've noted here. It only works if you can make the denominator 100. And because I can't, we can't do this. And that's also going to mean I can't do this one over here. So we're stuck with these methods up here. So with that being said, let's do them because these always work. You can always rely on them. So if I have 3 over 8 and I multiply it by 100 and I'll make it 100 over 1. I now am going to do some simplification. So I can simplify diagonally here. 8 divided by 4 is 2, and 100 divided by 4 is 25. Having now simplified, I will multiply my numerators. 3 by 25 is going to be 75, and 2 by 1 will be 2, which means my answer is going to be 37.5%, just like that. And I'm going to write that up here. Ooh, that's an ugly 3. Let's try that again. 37.5%. Okay, having done that, let's now turn this fraction into a decimal. Remember, to convert a fraction to a decimal, divide the numerator by the denominator. And this is always going to work. So I'm going to get 8. Ooh, let's try that again. That's ugly as well. 8 divided by 3, 0, 0, 0, 0. So I'm just putting these down just in case I need them. All right, so let's now do this. How many times does 8 go into 3? It doesn't, so I put a 0 up here and I carry that 3 over. Also remember, I put the decimal place straight up above. How many times does 8 go into 30? Well, that's going to go in 3 times because 8 3s are 24, and I'm going to have 6 left over. How many times does 8 go into 6? Well, it goes in 7 times because 8 times 7 is 56, and I'm going to have 4 left over. How many times does 8 go into 40? 8 goes into 40 5 times because 8 5s are 40, and it goes in perfectly. So I can stop there, and that means that my decimal is going to end up being 0.375. And just like that, I have turned a fraction into a decimal. Hopefully everything there has made sense. All right, there's one last example I want to go through here, and it is this page right here. And as you can see, we have 3 questions here, but I want to show you that we can do this really quickly if we make sure we memorize some key fractions. So as you can see here, all of these are mixed numbers. Now, when you're dealing with a mixed number, you're going to approach it in a certain way. So I have 1 here. Now, I know that 1 as a percentage is simply going to be 100%. So I'm going to think of that separately. And then I have this 1/2, and I know that 1/2 as a percentage is 50%. I don't need to do any calculations to do that. I should memorize the fact that 1/2 is 50%. So let me write that in. So therefore, 1 and 1/2 is simply going to be 100% plus 50%. So my answer is going to be 150%. I would do the same thing with decimals. I know that my 1 whole here is going to translate to 1, and 1/2 written as a decimal is simply going to be plus 0.5. I know that 1 over 2, or 1/2, written as a decimal is 0.5. So that means as a decimal, this would be 1.5. So this is based on just memorizing stuff. So you should be able to look at this and go, it's going to be 700 plus 75%, because 3 over 4 is 75%. So if I was to write this out, it would be 7 here is going to be 700%. Then 3 over 4 is going to be 75%. So that's going to be 775%. And then you should be able to write this as a decimal. It's going to be 7 plus 3 over 4 written as a decimal is going to be 0.75. So that's going to be 7.75. And lastly, you should be able to do this one without having to do all these steps. It's simply going to be 420%. And then over here will be 4.2. And just like that, through our memorization of some key fractions, we're able to answer it very quickly. So here is just a little table of the ones that you should make sure you have memorized. 1 over 5, 1 over 4, 1 over 3, 1/2, 2/3, 3/4, and 1. And of course, this 1 is 100%. If it was 2, it would be 200%, so on. And a lot of these, you should maybe know, like if I showed you 2 over 5 or 3 over 5, you should know that as well. But this is a good basis of what you should know.